There's a stretch of farmland in West Africa where, if you flew over it in 1975 and again today, you would swear you were looking at two different planets. The old photos show bare, cracked dirt running to the horizon. Land so stripped that the wind buried seedlings alive. The new ones show green. Trees scattered across the fields, crops growing thick beneath them. And here's the part that should stop you cold. The farmers didn't plant those trees. They didn't bring in machines or irrigation or foreign money. They did one thing. They stopped clearing their land. They left the spiny, useless-looking shrubs standing. And those thorns brought the desert back to life. If you've ever grown anything, you've been told the opposite. Clear the ground. Pull the weeds. Give your crop room, light, clean rows. A tidy field is a productive field. But across the Sahel, that vast dry belt running along the southern edge of the Sahara, that exact instinct nearly destroyed everything. Because the question buried in this story is one almost nobody asks. What if the messy, thorny, half-dead-looking bush in the middle of your field isn't competing with your crop at all? What if it's the only reason your crop survives? Stay with me, because the answer is hiding underground, and it's stranger than you'd ever guess. To understand how it got this bad, you have to go back to what people were told to do. Under French colonial rule, and for years after these countries won independence, agricultural officials gave Sahelian farmers a clear instruction: clear the trees. Trees were backward. Trees were in the way of modern commercial farming, of neat fields, of animal-drawn plows, of export crops like peanuts that could be shipped to Europe. And the law went further than advice. Across much of the region, the trees on a farmer's own land were declared the property of the state. Think about what that means. A farmer could look at a tree growing in the middle of his own field, on land his family had worked for generations, and legally he did not own it. Protect it, prune it, harvest its wood, and he could be fined for damaging government property. So farmers did the only rational thing. They cut, and they stopped caring about whatever grew back. Why nurture something that could be taken from you, something the authorities had branded a nuisance? Within a single generation, the scattered parkland that had sheltered their grandparents' crops was gone. And then, in the 1970s and 80s, the rains failed. A drought rolled across the Sahel that killed hundreds of thousands of people. The bare ground baked hard, the topsoil lifted into the sky, and the desert seemed to be winning for good. This is the world a young Australian agronomist named Tony Ronaldo walked into. He had arrived in Niger in the early 1980s, barely in his mid-20s, sent by a mission organization to fight the desert by planting trees. And he was failing. Badly. The seedlings he raised so carefully in nurseries died almost as fast as he could get them into the ground. The survival rate was under 20%. The heat, the sand, and the wind swallowed nearly everything he planted. Years of effort, enormous expense, and almost nothing to show for it. He would later admit, plainly, we were wrong, and our programs were misguided. He was close to giving up entirely. And then came the moment that changed everything, and it happened by accident. One day in 1983, driving across the barren land, he stopped his truck to let some air out of his tires for the sandy track ahead. And while he stood there, he looked down at something he had driven past 1,000 times without a second glance, a scrubby little bush poking out of the dust. Except when he crouched and really looked, it wasn't a bush at all. It was a tree. A tree re-sprouting from a living stump that had been cut down but never died, its roots still alive beneath the surface, sending up green shoots that everyone, including him, had dismissed as worthless scrub. And in that instant, he understood something staggering. The bushes were everywhere, millions of them, which meant that under the entire dead-looking landscape lay a vast, living root network, an enormous forest, intact, just waiting beneath the sand. He called it an underground forest. The solution he had crossed the world to find, he said, had been at my feet the whole time. What he did next cost almost nothing, and that's exactly why it could spread. Instead of raising expensive seedlings, he taught farmers to do the opposite of clearing. Find the living stumps already in your field. Choose the strongest few shoots on each one, prune away the rest, and then simply protect what grows. No nursery, no irrigation, no machinery. The tool, as he put it, was a $2 pocket knife. And where his planted trees had died 4 times out of 5, this worked at nearly 100%. In 1984, as another famine gripped the region, a Food for Work program gave it the push it needed, and the technique reached around 70,000 people across roughly 12,500 hectares. But here's the thing that makes this story remarkable. And it's the hurdle every farmer had to clear in his own mind first. To do this, they had to believe something that contradicted everything the experts had ever told them, that leaving the thorny shrub standing would make their millet grow better, not worse. It sounded absurd. And yet the science, when it finally caught up, said the farmers were right. So how on earth does a thorny shrub feed the crop growing next to it? The answer is hidden underground, and it's stranger than anyone expected. Many of these Sahel shrubs, species with names like Guiera senegalensis and Peleostigma reticulatum, send their roots far deeper than any crop can reach, down to moist soil that stays wet long after the surface has turned to powder. And at night, those deep roots do something that sounds almost like a trick. They pull water up from far below and release it into the shallow topsoil, exactly where a thirsty millet plant's roots are waiting. Scientists call it hydraulic lift, or bioirrigation. The shrub is, quite literally, watering the crop beside it for free, every single night. For years, this was only a theory, plausible but unproven in a real field. Then a research team led by the soil scientist Richard Dick set out to catch it happening. They tagged deep groundwater with a traceable chemical marker, a kind of heavy water you can follow, and then they watched. Within days, that tagged water had traveled out of the shrub's roots and up into the stems of the millet growing alongside it. There it was, proof, for the first time, that one plant was irrigating another, and the payoff was extraordinary. During a deliberately imposed drought, millet growing beside these shrubs produced over 900% more biomass than millet grown alone. The crop kept growing in soil so dry that by every measure it should have wilted and died days earlier. As Dick said of the discovery, everything about this is positive. And remarkably, the water is only half of what these shrubs do. Take the tree the farmers call the winter thorn, Phaedherbia albida, which behaves in a way that seems to defy common sense. Most trees shade your crops and steal their sunlight. This one does the reverse. It drops all of its leaves at the very start of the rainy season, precisely when the crops below need full sun to grow, and then it leafs out again in the dry season, when every other plant has shriveled, and the only green left is in its canopy, backwards from every other tree. And those leaves it sheds onto the field are rich in nitrogen, a free dose of fertilizer raining down onto the soil, year after year, at no cost to anyone. One leading agroforestry expert described it as a tree that deposits abundant quantities of organic fertilizer onto the food crops, totally free of charge. The results show up in the harvest. In Dick's long-term trials in Senegal, fields intercropped with these shrubs produced millet yields 105% and 128% higher than fields without them, and that was without adding any fertilizer at all. But the benefits didn't stop at water and nitrogen. The shrubs cooled the soil surface by several degrees during the fragile early weeks when seedlings live or die. They broke the force of the wind that had been burying young plants in sand. And over a single decade, they roughly doubled the amount of carbon stored in the soil itself, rebuilding the very ground that the clearing had destroyed. The useless bush, it turned out, was quietly doing the work of an irrigation system, a fertilizer factory, and a windbreak, all at the same time, all for nothing. So what happens when an entire region stops clearing and starts protecting? You get something you can see from space. By the late 2000s, researchers comparing decades of satellite and aerial imagery found that farmers across Niger had regreened an estimated 5 million hectares, roughly 200 million trees brought back, not by planting a single one, but simply by protecting what was already trying to grow. Now, those big numbers come from development agencies stitching together satellite images and ground surveys, so it's fair to treat them as careful estimates rather than an exact head count. But the scale stunned even the people who study this for a living. One geographer examining a single valley in Niger found it now held 50 times more trees than it did in 1975. Chris Ray, a researcher who spent decades documenting the change, called it probably the largest positive environmental transformation in the Sahel and perhaps in all of Africa. The extra grain those fields produced began feeding millions more people, and it spread in the most powerful way anything ever spreads in farming country. One farmer looking over the fence at his neighbor's fuller, greener field and quietly deciding to leave his own thorns standing. But if it's this good, you should be asking the obvious question: why hasn't it simply taken over everywhere? And here the story has to stay honest. Part of the answer is still the law. In many countries, farmers continue to lack clear ownership of the trees on their own land, so the old disincentive lingers. Why nurture something the state could claim? Part of it is tenure. Rent a field instead of owning it, and you won't invest years in a slow-growing tree. And running underneath all of it is a genuine scientific argument. The Sahel's rains have partly recovered since the 1990s, and researchers still debate how much of the greening is the farmers doing and how much is simply the weather turning. The people closest to the data point out that the land greened the most in the places with the most people actively protecting it. But it is a real, open debate, and anyone who tells you it's fully settled is selling you something. Even the grand top-down answer, the famous Great Green Wall, meant to plant a barrier of trees clear across the continent, mostly stalled. It has reached only a fraction of its goal, and over time it's been quietly redirected toward the very farmer-led approach that had been working all along. So we come back to the bare field and the thorny bush, and the question we started with: is the shrub competing with your crop or saving it? The Sahel's answer, written across 5 million hectares of recovered land, is about as clear as it gets. The thing that looked like the problem was the solution. The land was never truly dead. It was waiting, underground, in living roots and buried seeds, for someone to stop fighting it. And the most surprising part of this entire story isn't the science or the satellites or the numbers. It's that the fix cost almost nothing and demanded almost nothing. Not planting, not spending, but restraint. The simple discipline to leave something alone. And maybe that's the real lesson buried in this dirt. And it reaches far beyond the edge of the Sahara. We're trained to believe that working the land means clearing it, controlling it, stripping it down to only what we chose to put there. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for a piece of ground is to stop, to look at the scrubby, thorny, inconvenient thing you were about to tear out, and ask whether it knows something you don't. If you've got a corner of land you've been keeping ruthlessly clean, you might try leaving one stubborn shrub standing this season and watch what grows up beside it.